Welcome to the Good Listening To podcast with me, Chris Grimes, the podcast series that brings you The Clearing, where all good questions come to be asked and all good stories come to be told. And where all my guests have two things in common. They're all creative individuals and all with an interesting story to tell. There are some lovely storytelling metaphors: a clearing, a tree, a storytelling exercise called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, some alchemy, some gold, and a cake. So yes, who are you, what's your story, and what life lessons learned along your way would you like to share with us? So welcome to a GLT with me, CG, and we're recording. And, oh yes, now welcome. This is a very privileged, awesome, wonderful day in the sunshine of the clearing. I'm really excited to talk to Genevieve Thompson, who I have long thought of as being a real wise woman. If you're from Ireland, which you're not, you'd be a banshee in a good way. You're from New York, we get that. Why I'm excited, and just to blow lots of smoke at you, is I've known you for... this will be our 11th year. I met you in 2010 at a really energetic shift moment in my life. And you were a real mentor and continue to be ever since, actually. And I often think about you. And indeed, if I could credit you with one of the most profound lines I still use in my own coaching about energy being, the elixir of all connection. You said once, your energy is like a precious pot of golden honey. Be very, very careful where you pour it. And I've so resonated and chimed and echolocated to that notion ever since. Because I'm like a Duracell bunny in my life, and energy is a wonderful wellspring of geyser. I don't mean me as a geyser, but I'm talking about a geyser of life force. And so it's a really important thing. So welcome to the clearing on the Good Listening To podcast, Genevieve Thompson.
Yay! Thank you.
You're very welcome. Also, you're my first guest who I'm speaking to from a boat, please. So just tell us where you're speaking from.
I am in a little town called Rickmansworth right now on the Grand Union Canal. Do you know it at all?
I do. Rickmansworth, ironically, was the place of my first ever teaching practice when I was doing a junior school placement. When I was at the Central School of Speech and Drama doing my teaching degree, Rickmansworth was the first year of my 4-year degree placement.
Wow. Well, that's where I am. So there's a thing called an aquadrome with beautiful lakes, and we're on the canal. And I'm sitting on my boat with the water on one side and the towpath on the other and floating.
The last time I saw you, actually, which is quite a few years ago now, was on the boat, or you've got two boats, haven't you?
We used to. We used to, and then we had one, and now we have two again. So yeah, we have two, but it's one of them is different to what you know. Yeah. Okie
dokie. So yes, Welcome. We're going to take you through the lovely construct of the storytelling metaphors as we go. So the first thing to talk to you about is if somebody does that rather clunky thing and they don't have any reference point as to who we are, and they just turn to you and say, what do you do? What's your favourite way of answering that, Genevieve?
That's funny. I haven't been asked that in such a long time. I guess I haven't been in new environments for very long. What do I do? Right now, my first answer is that I write. I'm a writer. And then they tend to ask what I write. And I usually push the question away and say, whatever I'm curious about right now. And I guess the other thing that I do is I listen. That's my jam. Yeah, I'm a professional listener.
And interestingly, when I Googled you, because I could, before we did this conversation, interestingly, right, as it happens on your LinkedIn profile, it just says writer first and foremost, a personal performance coach. And then you've also said somatic worker, which is an intriguing word.
Yes. So that refers to, I started off as a massage therapist in that field of somatic work, and then began to doing massage since 2001, I think. And so for me, somatic worker means acknowledging that we are inhabiting and inhabited through our bodies and doing work with that. So people come to me for a massage session, but very often what ends up happening is that we work with language as well as touch and movement through whatever their blocks are. And massage therapy just never seemed to really speak to all of that. So these days I can work with people by talking with them about their concerns. Someone might call up and say, hey, I've got this ache over here and I think this is going on. There's a particular kind of conversation you can have about your somatic, your bodily experience and your senses and your kinesthetic sense and how that makes meaning for you in the world, and therefore how you can be better in the world and in your body.
And to be explicit then, somatic, I've inferred the meaning of it from what you've just been explaining, but in a nutshell, what somatic just means body.
Yeah. So the soma is the body. But the word means more than just like, oh, my foot. It means that the thing that I call myself that is material.
Beautifully put, yes. In fact, interestingly, I was speaking to somebody just yesterday who talked about their chronic pain situation, which was slightly left of field to what I thought we were there talking about. But they talked intriguingly, somatically, about how they have a groin strain, but it affects their jaw. And I was intrigued by that because of the jaw. And I had no idea until I said, tell me a bit more if you want to. And just the idea that parts of our body are surprisingly linked was what I took from that.
Absolutely. There's a really simple trick you can do where if you stick your finger in your mouth, thumb in your mouth, and suck on it, you will often feel your pelvic floor move, like lift.
Wow. Right?
So there's I love that game where you just sort of, you got to get relaxed and you got to listen for it, but you will often feel a little tug. There's like, the body is just an extraordinary thing. It's such a cool device and machine, and it's also the only way that we know anything is through what we experience.
We
have to experience our body,
People listening, I would encourage you to just stick your thumb in your mouth, give it a good suck and see if you feel so that makes such sense to the notion of a baby wanting comfort and then adults subsequently wanting comfort.
Exactly. And it's and that's all of that discovery came about through the recognition of oxytocin as the sort of drug of love, right? And that was discovered, I forget the name of the woman who figured it out. Of course, it was a woman, and she was into sort of psychoanalysis and neurology, I think. But she discovered that there was this particular chemical that our bodies produce that happens when we feel that particular feeling of love. And I think her research focused predominantly on mothers and babies.
Beautiful.
Right.
Lovely. So
which I have to say makes me think of you, because one of the things that I think about when I think of you is how in love you are with your family and your children.
Thank you. Thank
That's
you.
like,
really lovely of you.
That's the thing that I first knew about you that always carried that feeling of like, that tenderness and that. Yeah, so there's oxytocin in the air in your house all the time, I'm sure.
It's nice to be able to name it now. What's that smell? Oh, it's oxytocin. It's good. Lovely. Love that. And 10 years ago, we had sort of working voices in common, which is how I met you. But you were such a profound and immediate sort of wise presence that I remember thinking, in the culture of the company that I strayed into, there was a sort of an idea of a door opening and then immediate inclusivity. And I remember being slightly in awe, if I may, about the fact that, gosh, day one, I'm going to be alongside this person. And it was just a real, he really gave me the nudge of confidence, having had I'd had a real hiccup I was sort of dashed on the rock of something circa 2010. But actually 10 to now has been when I've really, really found my true purpose. But you're at the sort of genesis point of a newfound reinvigoration, which is, again, there's a story behind the story there, which we don't need to go into. But it's just really, really lovely to reconnect with you now and give you the gift of bringing you into the construct of the Good Listening To podcast.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Yeah, so you've built and built this thing for yourself, and now I get to sit in the world that you've built, which is really lovely. And I remember one of my favorite moments of teaching ever was when I got to coach you. Because you went, bing!
Gosh, thank you. I find that quite moving. Thank you. That's very generous. So my gift back to you then, shall we say, is to bring you into the Good Listening To podcast structure. So first and foremost, as I do with all my guests, let's talk about a clearing, Genevieve Grant Thompson. Metaphorically or literally, what is a clearing for you?
I think of two things when I think of a clearing in terms of a space to, like, what I crave when I want to make my work in the world. And one is an actual clearing, like walking through, just over here, for example, I'm pointing to where the trees are on that side of me. You can walk through the woods and there's lakes, and then you can turn a corner and find a little spot where people are not hanging out, where there's a bit of grass surrounded by trees. And I was thinking about that specifically, and I think for me, in that respect, a physical clearing is actually not so much a clearing, but the spot at the base of a tree. Every now and then you find a tree where you can sit at where the trunk meets the ground and it kind of holds you. Or climbing a tree, you know, like trees that are quite user-friendly. You can climb a tree and you know you could sit in the cradle of a quite a large branch. For me, that's like every cell in my body just goes, okay. And now I can settle and be calm. And the other thing is my desk, which is just a plank of wood stuck above some bookcases, but it's the site of my promise to myself that I can do deep thinking and good work.
In a clearing is a tree and you and me. I love that. Also, reintroducing myself to you there, and thinking about the honey line that I've already attributed to you. There was an extraordinary picture, ironically, of a big a bee honeycomb, extraordinary, sumptuous picture of honey attached to a tree. So I love the fact that in your clearing is a tree, and also the plank and the wood of your desk. Yeah. Also behind you, there's wood as well. You've got some panelling within your boat. Also, I know because of your wonderful nomadic tendency, I think you said Thursdays is boat moving day. Is that what you said? Because we were talking about when to take.
Yeah, I don't move every Thursday, but because of the rhythm of the rest of my life, I try to reserve a day when I know I'm going to move a boat. If we were to move the boat, it would be Thursday.
Yes.
Yeah. And you don't do anything else on boat moving day. You don't make any other promises because you never know what's going to happen.
But I love the fact that you're in search or the epic quest to find a new clearing in the next mooring spot.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, when Steve and I, like in normal times when we would move the boat, we'd cruise along and then we'd find a spot and then we'd tie up and settle everything in and then we'd lock the boat up and go for a walk and go exploring. And that's one of the best parts about being nomadic is every new place is like, which bit of this is home for us? Where's the local pub? Where's the local shop? Oh, I like that. Maybe I'll come sit here and read a book, or maybe we can come here for a picnic, or I can do a walk around here again. And so you create a map of Great Britain that is a series of places that you can call home. And
how often do you return? Because I presume because it's a limited infrastructure, you can't be going to brand new places each time, can you? Maybe
we could slowly put around the whole country and take a couple of years doing it because there's so many canals and rivers. But of course, we have our emotional center at London. So technically, you're not supposed to return to the same spot for a whole year unless you've gone out to a certain location and then you're coming back again. And if you're coming back, you're allowed to come back as long as you're heading in the opposite direction.
Lovely.
So you could get in 2 visits a year. We probably have done more than that, but we would be in a place once a season, basically.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. And of itself, the sort of the nomadic freedom of the boat. I used to be intrigued by where you come in from today. Then, whenever we met, even in the early days, 10 years ago. So I love the fact that it's obviously a lifestyle where you expanded to 2 boats, shrunk again. Now you're back to 2 boats. Very nice. So I love the segue of the tree in the clearing is perfect. Get you, because I now want to bring a tree into the clearing anyway. So how ahead of the curve were you? And we're going to shake your tree to see which storytelling apples fall out. So it can be a tree of your choosing or of your, architecture as you like. So you're going to climb the tree and we're going to let some storytelling apples fall out. And they take the form of the lovely storytelling exercise called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where you've had 5 minutes, or as long as you've needed, to think about 4 things that have shaped you, 3 things that inspire you, 2 things that never fail to, squirrels, as you said yourself when I told you about this, to get your attention, and then 1 quirky or unusual fact about you we couldn't also possibly know about you until you tell us. So over to you. You can go where you like, when you like, and you can clonk apples on my head as you see fit. So off you go.
So I think one of the things that has shaped me has been living on a boat, actually. That's an easy one. Choosing a lifestyle that's nomadic and that's off-grid, that is, itinerant, which has so many connotations, and choosing to live outside of so many of the constructs that make us feel normal. If you don't have an address that you can get your post to, especially right now, how do you get deliveries? How does your mom send you a birthday card? If you move through the world without having a land-based address that you always come back to, then how do you have a sense of community or belonging or place or village? And all of the emotional stuff that we attach to being on a grid with an address and a map, even the aspiration to own a house or a piece of land. So many of these things you become aware of only when you step outside of them, really. And then because now I naturally inhabit this place outside of it, I get to make more conscious choices about what I want to step back into.
Yes.
So I have never had a geographic community, except for a very brief period living in Baltimore in the States, but I've hardly ever identified with a particular location or piece of land or even group of people. And living the way that I am supports that and makes it feel more normal. So it's yeah, of course, as opposed to me feeling disjointed in how I'm arranged in the world. And being conscious of who I'm going to bother to visit, because they don't know where I live anymore. So I've got to make sure I make myself available. Being conscious of who I tell where I live, and how much water I use, because I take my water with me. I'm not plugged into a system, or how I generate my electricity. That kind of consciousness has certainly shaped my sense of, it's probably accelerated my sense of, what's going on the planet climate wise. And it's refined my sense of power and responsibility. I remember when you and I first met, I was working on this idea for myself. I don't know if I talked about it much, but trying to figure out what power is and how it works. And it kept occurring to me that the more responsibility you take, the more the right kind of power you have. And it seems to me that living on a boat allows me to practice that in immediate ways all the time.
There's such an autonomy in the freedom of deciding, I suppose, the metaphorical gypsy life, where you go where the winds take you, or where the tides take you, or where the waterways allow.
Yeah, absolutely. And freedom is probably my, if you were to ask me what I've been looking for my whole life, it's freedom. It's freedom, and every decision I make is me choosing a different kind of freedom and playing with what that feels like. And if you want me to stop doing something or leave a place or give up on something, just make me feel like you're taking away my freedom and I'm out. So I think you've hit the nail on the head, that freedom and autonomy definitely is a big part of that.
And in fact, the very powerful adage, and I don't mind reincorporating it, my energy is like a precious pot of golden honey, I've got to be very careful where I pour it. I remember really profoundly, that was a very profound moment of exit. You were going.
Yes.
And what's so lovely is I've come to find you again, knowing that you left and knowing how powerful that was.
Right. Yeah. That's a very good point. Actually, it's like, and it's very much that feeling of, so what you been up to?
Yeah.
Where you've been pouring it, right? Yeah.
And in all your freedom, I also know that you're very profoundly attached to where you're from, because I remember lucky enough to be with you in New York, where you're from, and forgive me if it's somewhere else. But I remember that being, there was a little trip once, and we had some comedy moments of going to deliver for a client where we're like scrabbling around trying to work out what the fuck we're doing, trying to finalise a program, and we're live. Oh, fuckity fuck. It was all really exciting in the back of a New York cab. And it was to do with
we were in a car.
Yeah. And it was like, but we nailed it. But there was a sense of you pointing out the window going, oh, there was a sense of, this is your patch.
Yes. And so, there are particular aspects of New York that do feel like home to me. They don't feel like it anymore. So it's a temporal thing, right? Like, I can point to buildings and neighborhoods and say, I did that there, and that means that to me. But it's all historic. And New York has changed so much. So that's what I mean. Like, I can no longer identify with New York as it is. But I, of course, have an historical love of it. So I don't know how freedom shows up there, but there's definitely a sense of, actually, the reason I love the culture that I experienced in New York so much was I felt free.
And it also seems like, you take a sense of who your own community goes with you where you go. So obviously there's you and Steve connected, but it's not like you're completely abandoning and moving on. You're actually, it's a bit like bringing your community to the new community you decide to be in. So there's a piece there because you're bringing yourself as a unit of containment with you. So it's not completely, just utter abandon whenever you go anywhere. So there's real commitment to what you're doing.
It's sort of it gets imprinted in you, right? And in your cells and in your habits and in your language. And then you, exactly as you say, you take it with you where you go. I know that, for example, I was living in New York and then I moved to Baltimore, and that's another thing that shaped me. I spent about a decade in Baltimore before I came to London. That was a decade between like mid-20s and mid-30s where most of us start to go, I think I know who I am a little bit. Like, this is my thing. This is not my thing. This is how I want my relationships and friendships to go. These are my real interests. Those are not really my interests. That kind of discovery. And there was a real sense of being met.
Yes.
That's what it was. And I'm sure I've explained this before, living in England, coming from the East Coast of the States, and having that as having New York and then Baltimore. And even when I went from New York to Baltimore, in Baltimore, New York is north of Baltimore. That's why I'm doing this. But when I went to Baltimore, I was told I was a bit edgy for Baltimore, even though Baltimore is a big, strong city. But I realized my communication style has always been, I grew up in an environment where communication was direct, right on the table, in your face. And there's always an assumption that goes with a language style, right? So the assumption was that I can say what I want because everybody around me can say what they want back. So there's a kind of freedom there, right?
A directness and a pragmatism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it doesn't feel like we're pushing on each other too much because it's the nature of the water that we're all swimming in.
Yes, and there's a steeliness in the capacity to be able to live in cities like New York and now London, even though you're very free within London. But there's definitely a steel of streetwiseness.
Yeah, and a sort of robustness, right?
Yes.
But then I came to
and resilience. Yeah,
and resilience.
Yeah,
and you don't feel it until you go somewhere else, right? It's just how it is. So I come to London, and what I discovered in my first few years, I'm walking around being direct, up front and asking questions out loud, and all around me people are going like
awkward.
And kind of going shh, like easy now. And what I learned was that the freedom that sort of the British culture, maybe in the south of England, I notice it's different as you go north, the way that people allow space for each other here is by not saying things too loudly, is by not saying things out loud, because there's a feeling of, I don't want to impose on you, right? And so So for me, I was like, why isn't anybody telling me anything? I don't know what's going on. You know, they're all keeping secrets, but there was very much a sense of, we're going to let you do your thing and have our opinions and tell them to each other, but not you, and give you space to do what you want. And so, yeah, so there's, I mean, you can find freedom anywhere, I guess, but yeah, definitely that I noticed that. And it was quite, I think that probably shaped me as well, in that because I wasn't expecting it, because I didn't come here to settle. I came here to go to school, and then I thought I was going home again. So I was curious about what was going on, but I was there to study. And while I was doing that, I had to work part-time. So I'm learning this as a byproduct, not giving it my full attention. And
by the way,
yeah.
I very nearly got back in touch with you recently, but then didn't, because I know that you'd gone home for a very, very profound reason. And I don't know if you're going to talk about this or not, but I'll just mention what it is. But I know it's to do with the recent, very sad death of your father. But that's where you did a return home, didn't you? And I don't know whether you went back to New York or whether it was Baltimore or
that was another weird thing. And that's definitely something that has shaped me. My father, who's from New York, New Jersey, and raised us in New Jersey, has lived for over a decade on his sailboat, and his sailboat was in the Caribbean.
Oh, so
what's funny is here in this. So I'm black and white, right? Racially speaking, in the sort of dumbest terms, black and white. My mom is a white lady with blonde hair and fair skin. My father is an African American guy with the afro and the dark skin. Here in this country, mixed race, people assume that you're Caribbean. That's the automatic assumption. That's the Windrush that came here. So they look at me and they assume it's probably Caribbean going on. My father is not Caribbean, but my father, since I moved here, lived on his boat with his girlfriend in the Caribbean. They sailed from the East Coast all the way down to the Virgin Islands and lived there.
And had he been in Britain, they'd have done an inverse Windrush.
Exactly. Right.
It's called a rush wind if you go the other way.
Rush wind, exactly. Flip it. We're going to take some of your land now. But so I went to the Caribbean, which is not my home at all. Another thing that's foreign, absolutely foreign to me. Everything about it is utterly foreign.
Is that where you went to help him die then? Sorry.
Yes, exactly. So in March, we got the word that he was being sent home to die. And my father's home is on his boat, right? And his boat is not in a marina, it's in a harbor. And so I went to the Virgin Islands, to St. John, to help my father die at home. And so it's one thing, again, house on land, you're plugged into the grid, you've got all the resources, it's time to get a hospital bed in, you move out the furniture, you get a hospital bed. That's interesting enough. That's enough of a journey. Try doing it on a boat. And this isn't a yacht. This is like a 38-foot, I think, sailboat where all the furniture is built in. There's no room for a hospital bed. And so I was there for about 2 months, living in a place where it's like 35 degrees all the time, humid, hurricanes. It's like this weird paradise, but I'm there for this weird grieving process. And you don't have cold weather, but you have hurricanes. It's a trade-off, And then my father wasn't dying as fast as we all thought he would, including him. And so I came home to England, to my boat and my husband. And then, well, honestly, it really was a bit of I know everyone's had a rough year. I came home to my boat, my husband, and our cat. And then my cat died.
Oh.
Pussy cat. I know.
And what was your pussycat's name?
Charlotte.
Of course. Oh, Charlotte. Charlotte the Moggy is no more. I'm sorry.
And then so that was June. And then September, it was like, Papa really is dying. And his partner, Sandra, she needs help. And my agenda, my commitment was to help her. Was to be a part of that process and to be in it as much as I could. So I got back on a plane right around the time we went into our second lockdown. I got back on a plane again. to St. John. And it was wild because the people in the Caribbean figured I was the son of a Caribbean man or person who had gone off and was coming home. So they thought I was doing some kind of homecoming, even though I wasn't local. They thought I was somehow, and everybody thought I was from somewhere where I wasn't.
Yes.
Like nobody but me and my immediate family knew that, that none
were there other siblings wrapped around you in this quest to help your father as exit?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So my brother, who lives on the East Coast in the States, in New Jersey, I think he had like a 4-hour flight to get back and forth. We all had to deal with COVID protection, so we all had to be very careful about when it was worth flying, and how to fly safely. So he could come and go more easily. So he would come for a bit and help, and then he would go home and he has a wife and a kid, and then he could jump back and forth. And my father's partner's daughter, Kara, came to support as well.
And did you all manage to configure in the right place at the right time for what you were there to do?
I think, well, we did, and we did and we didn't. What was amazing was how all 5 of us ended up on a tiny little sailboat and managed to find space and make it work. And there was something really beautiful in how everybody found their skills, right? So Kara was always very good at noticing when we needed to eat, and like the comforts of like, go get groceries and cook us some food and just make sure that people have
the basics,
clean sheets on the beds, and just she had an eye for that when the rest of us were going like this. My brother is an artist and a carpenter, and he took over the task of building my father's coffin.
Wow. Your father was very aware during all of this as well.
He was aware. He was able-bodied. He was slowly getting weaker. Yeah. And eventually he had a hard time finding words, but he was fully cognizant, alive, able-bodied most of the time. It was almost more difficult because I realize now, it's that old, you don't know what you got till it's gone, right? All of my father's power, well, maybe 80% of my father's power in the world was down to the fact that he could do it himself.
Oh, yes.
And in the last year of his life, he lost, and actually for years he'd been getting older and weaker, and when I would come visit, he would hide things from me. Like there was a time when he had joint pain and he couldn't handle ropes very well, which on a sailboat, you need to be able to handle ropes. So he had made a secret plan with his partner that he would just say, "Can you get that for me?" And she wouldn't argue with him because he didn't want me to know that he couldn't handle the ropes because his hands were hurting. And then finally he got busted. I found out and used my somatic knowledge to help him fix his hands, and then he could handle ropes again.
Oh, but lovely. So you found your part. Obviously, your what you could do to lean in to help too was obvious in you being there, but also that's so lovely. You brought some of the somatic stuff as well.
Exactly, and me, I showed up and became a central part of his palliative care team. So it was me, his partner, and him. And my brother showed up and did what he could, but he was more about helping in the outside space. And Kara helped, but she wasn't there that long. So I was his death nurse, basically. And
it sounds, if I may, reading between all those really profound lines, that that adage of you enabled a good death by the sound of it.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk of like death doulaing and things like that, and that's what I wanted. I wanted him to die as well as he possibly could. Luckily, that was also his agenda, so we were on the same team, and it was, in some ways, it was really easy to do because his spirit was so intact, and we were allowed to be sad together, and there wasn't a lot to be afraid of. Like he kept us from being afraid of his death because he wasn't afraid of dying, which was amazing.
Did you have that oxygenation of saying and doing everything you wanted to do, so you felt that you were all at peace with the tragedy, but at peace with it because it's the natural order of things? And
I can go one better than that, Chris. That oxygenation has been a part of my entire life with my father. He never had a bucket list because he always did it, which is extraordinary.
He lived
And he
a
said
good
it out
life
loud.
he lived a good life and a happy life and a fulfilled life then.
Yeah, and I think part of the gift was that, he always, well, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, slow-growing prostate cancer, I think around 2003, and chose his route of living and healing his body as best he could. And that probably put the final, I'll say, nail in the coffin in terms of the death of his ever trying to assimilate into normal society, right? So his whole life, he was like, I'm doing it my way. I'm responsible for my joy. I'm responsible for my well-being. I'm responsible for what my life looks like. And then when he was introduced this, like, we all know we're going to die, but you probably know what you're going to die from. And your timeline has probably been foreshortened. He was like, oh, hell no. Okay, good. Now, any of those little extra things that were maybe a little bit of a waste of time, a bit like my golden honey, right? He was like, no one else gets this but who I really love. And so it just refined it even further. But it wasn't like there was a big flip. He'd always been going that way in my estimation of him. Of course, he's my father and I adore him. So I'm going to create a myth out of him. But it's a great myth. And so there was nothing for me to forgive or negotiate. We did that as it came. Fought like cats and dogs when I was younger, and got it done at the time.
And there's a lovely.
I'm not sure that's the case for everyone else, but
we're going to come on to a cherry on the. We're going to come on to a cherry on the cake later, but the cherry on the cake of the story about your father is the sort of somatic resonance with your capability in what you do, and you're able to bring that to great nurture at his end, which is a really wonderful thing. Yeah,
it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary how well trained I was to do that task. And there were moments when he would be in his hospital bed, and he'd kind of wake up from sleeping, which he did a lot, and look around like he was confused. And I would say to him, what's going on? And he would say things like, well, I think I'm uncomfortable, but I'm not sure. Which is, he was on morphine for the pain, but the morphine didn't knock him out.
Yeah.
And he was having sensations he'd never had before. And he was always very curious about even his suffering. Like, what is this thing? What is it doing? Do I need to change it? Or what can I learn? He was doing that. But because of my training, I could help him get a vocabulary a lot faster. And I could see, for example, the arrangement of his body in the bed and predict where the discomfort was.
Okay.
And so I could simply shift him a bit. And he was always so impressed. I would shift him a bit. I would say, can I move you? I think I might be able to make you more comfortable. And because he trusted me, he would go, okay, yeah, give it a try. And I'd move his leg or his knee or something. And he would go, oh, that's so cool. How do you know that?
So there's a nice combo there of being like a shamanic and a somatic nurse.
Yeah.
Able to be there in the Caribbean when the time was right.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And using the sailboat analogy that keeps on giving, thank you for telling us that lovely story about your father. I'm going to sail us back to the clearing now, back to the apples that we're talking about. And so far, we've had your boat and your father as being things that have shaped you. Anything else that you want to go back into the tree to shake out for us?
I think having that almost decade of life in like after New York into Baltimore. Mm-hmm. So living in the city of Baltimore, it's amazing how much that place imprinted on me. And I think it's because, so life in Baltimore, shout out to anyone who's ever been in Baltimore. It's a city that had an extraordinary mix of poverty and wealth, fluidity between very separated neighborhoods in terms of poverty, wealth, race. It's a very gay city. It's a very camp city. It's like you can be, before we had all this gender fluid language, everyone in Baltimore had that language because we were living it and around it, and it was just normalized. Camp is what we had for breakfast, and the ability to laugh at ourselves. And so to live in that space and to simply witness every day different people, very different people, living their lives and figuring themselves out. And it wasn't an expensive city, so you could live a life where you could work a part-time job and pay your rent and have enough energy left to make your art.
Lovely. And I'm assuming there's a parallel with Baltimore and San Francisco. This is quite a stereotypical view of cities I perceive as being very sort of gay aware. So I'm assuming that Baltimore and San Francisco, are they in parallel, like almost sisters to each other?
I've never lived in San Francisco, but the reputation that San Francisco has for being like a place where gay people can be safe and happy and out, Baltimore has that too. But Baltimore is a black city. Mm-hmm. Baltimore has a lot more. San Francisco has black people in it, but Baltimore because it's East Coast, it's like right on the border between the North and the South and the Civil War culture and all that kind of thing. So the fact that you had black people owning their property and owning their lives and running things since the 1800s is quite unusual. And that was a big part of it too.
And there's something very rich and profound about your ability to be able to, as you've talked about being black and white, if you like, almost binary, light and shade, how you can fit in. Because presumably it's a bit like, if you've got where the rain stops and it's not raining, light, dark, shade, you can presumably step either into either of those domains, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny. I call it unconscious passing, right?
Love that. Unconscious passing from one domain to the other.
I'm sure there's lots of times when I've had an easier way of moving through a space because of my look, and I had no awareness of it. I mean, this is how I understand what people talk about as white privilege now, right? You have a way of moving through a space. I'll give you a really simple example. My first year in London, I was in school and I was studying, and a lot of my classmates were Greek. And, your first few weeks, you don't know anybody and you're trying to figure out how to make friends while you're studying. And I went to this reading. Harold Pinter was doing a reading, which was just like, he's one of my heroes, right? And I'm like, he's alive and he's reading, I'm there. So I'm in the queue outside to go in, and someone I had seen around or met at some dinner or something or in a pub was ahead of me. I didn't know him, but I knew who he was. So Are
we in London or Baltimore in this anecdote of Pinter?
This is London, but this is just an example of that unconscious passing, right?
Yeah.
So I reach over and I tap him on the shoulder, thinking, I've got to be social. I've got to, just say hi to people that you've seen before instead of hiding. So I tap him on the shoulder and he turns around. He looks at me, goes, "Oh, hello," kisses me on both cheeks and introduces me to his friends. He's remembered my name, kisses on both cheeks. I'm like, oh, I'm in, right? And all these people sort of absorb me into they've got a little group of wonderful, philosophical, active artist people, and they just absorb me in and invite me to whatever they're doing, talk to me like they're interested. About 6 months later, I'm sitting around with these people in a pub in South London, and I realize from their conversation with me that they're assuming that I am Greek like them.
Wow.
The whole time, all that treatment, all that openness was because they thought I was a Greek person in London.
And that's a beautiful testament to one's capability to chameleon-like fit in when required. A bit like just not changing your spots or being inauthentic, but you've just, if you turn up to tap somebody on the shoulder, when you turn round, there's that immediacy of, is she like me? Can I, humanity is what binds us all. There's obviously something that you're just, there's an immediacy of presentation of self, of my presence is here, da-da, I can work with that, kiss on both cheeks, boom, you're in, which is a testament to connection, actually.
Exactly. And they had assumed, I had no idea that they had assumed I was Greek for months.
You don't even like Karma Solera. I'm kidding.
And by the time I clarified, I was like, no, wait, I'm not. As far as I know, there's no Greek anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Then they already liked me too much. So I was still in, you know what I mean? But I think, so Baltimore had a lot of that going on, I think. Baltimore's got loads of its own problems, but there's a sense of, if you put on the right outfit, you can hang out in any space.
Yes.
You know.
So it's about adaptability as well. Yeah. Adaptability, the ability to blend in.
Yeah. And most importantly, I think this here's the thing you'll like, this yes and attitude.
I'm all over that.
Baltimore. You show up, you stick a flower up your nose and you go, this is my look. They go, yes. And what else?
Here's a shrub for your ear.
Your bum. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I was quite proud of myself. I didn't say shove up your bum. That's what I was thinking, but I didn't say it. So I was quite proud. Yes, and it's now up my bum. That's lovely.
And I think that goes hand in hand with being able to laugh at yourself, you know.
Yes, have a sense of humor and humility.
Yeah, humility, such a powerful thing. So
I love the idea of global head of oneself. You know, I'm global head of myself. I can go where I like, when I like, and I can find a way to connect. And you know, I enjoy connecting with people, irrespective of who, the what, the where, the why, the who, the why, the, and it's just interesting to see if you can find a way in. Which is partly what this is about. I just love listening to people, which is why I've got really passionate about, hey, I'll give this person a damn good listening to. What are they going to tell me?
Exactly. Yeah, it's so much fun. And so I think, so definitely being in a city that allowed you to sort of try out all the different versions of yourself and just gleefully welcome them all in, you know, that definitely shaped me. So so what do we got? We've got boat life, my time with my father, Baltimore, being married.
Next, I don't mean next marriage. I mean next bit of information. Next apple.
Next apple. Boom, being married. Probably a lot because I was never one of those girls who was like, one day I'll get married, I'll find my Prince Charming, and then we'll make a little house and a family, and everything will be okay. I never had that image for myself. So I have friends who are still kind of impressed that I'm actually married. And I always say that Steve is the only person I could have married.
Ah, that's lovely. You found the soulmate, the only one that could or should or would.
Like, he's the only one for whom marriage was the right thing to do. Like, if it wasn't for Steve, I wouldn't be married. And do you mind me asking, had you had previous offers? I'd had previous...
I mean, proposals. Sorry, I interrupted you.
I'd had previous relationships where people had said, you know, one day when I ask you to marry me.
Yes.
But what's funny is those people, I knew that I would never have married them. So they were on something. I kept stum about it, not because of their egos, but, you know. But yeah, Steve, and I've had previous, you know, people who I loved deeply and dearly in lots of ways, but was never going to set up house with any of them. Was never going to commit in that way. And when Steve asked me to marry him, it was this extraordinary proposal, but I remember these two thoughts in my head. One was like, wow, this is a big moment. This is a theatrical moment. Genevieve, you should take it all in and feel it. And I, you know, am I going to cry? This is really profound. And all I could think the whole time I was trying to process it and take it all in was, that could be a lot of fun. That was the only thought.
So there was a lovely joy and spontaneity attached to the connection, which I gathered outside looking in is part of your connection, is the joy of connection and exploration, because he's obviously sharing the life on the boats with you. And you've made me think about that. I don't know if it's an insect at this point, but the water boatman, this creature that's able to sort of go across the viscosity of water and cover a big scape of water by just running along the top. So you get to walk on water in the right relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. We get to, and playfulness is, I had a friend a few years ago who's also married. She asked me what I thought was the sort of thing on which my marriage hinged, like what was the relationship based on. And I thought about it and I was like, it's playfulness. Like when it's going well, we are children together. Skipping through the
your inner child. I love that, because I'm all about that too. We must never lose our inner child. Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. And you know, you have to be a child. You have to be a child to live on a boat with someone else.
And in fact, during lockdown, you know, my family are awesome, but Stan has been my lockdown bestie, my 13-year-old pet Gibbon, as I call him. So, but he's my lockdown bestie because we're just completely stupid all the time, in a good way.
Yeah.
So you're back to your apples. We're nearly there with shaking the what shaped you. This is lovely, by the way, and it all connects because we're talking about alchemy and gold later, but you're giving me that in spades anyway. So anything else that you'd like to talk about shaping you before we go on to inspire? And again, if there's overlap, it doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, theater. And so my experience with theater is, I think, a little bit different to yours in that for me, theater has always been a space. I came to it through the desire to help a friend succeed at an audition. I was immediately introduced to political theater, ensemble political theater. So it became, how do we do what we can to make the world a little bit better and put the right ideas into the world? And then I stayed with it because the way that I do theater is I sit out of the spotlight myself and get to listen to the creative minds doing their work. I get to be a handmaiden to these great works as a stage manager, actor, or a dramaturg or a researcher. And when I make my own work, as a writer, I realize I've gone back to thinking like a theater maker. Like I'm creating performative moments. I'm creating these rituals of discovery. And there's something really profound about the idea of committing to make-believe. Not just because you're on a stage, but in any moment you can turn something into a profound event or a gleeful event because of how you decide to play it.
Like the magic.
And so theater is,
like the magic if anything's possible.
Yes.
Which
Absolutely.
is the Stanislavski construct. And also in reading up about how you describe your work, you did talk about the fact you talk to and the idea of people creating in a space. You said you speak to or you work with smart, creative, frustrated people to turn them into a tangible success. So there's something about the director, the enabler, the galvanizer of others to find success.
Absolutely. And there's also something about, some theater makers, like so many great actors I know, go through phases of developing themselves because of the craft. And so they'll do anything in order to perfect their craft. And I know writers who, like, for them, language is a tool that you play with and you do anything with it so that you can develop your craft. And for me, I'm not that agile. I need to be in love with it first, and I need to believe in it, and then I will do anything.
And I'm hearing as well, there's that lovely idea, as you mentioned earlier, about the idea of just listening, really acutely listening as to how I can contribute to move this forward. Even actually listening to your father's body and how he was positioned. There's listening, which is a recurring thing in the sort of somatic. So your hearing is very attuned as a sense in that, I think.
Yeah. And there's that sense that I like, if I were like, when I helped to produce a Shakespearean play, like Hamlet, right? I see a lot of productions where people come in and they sort of impose their view on it or look for the secret meaning that they're going to reveal that Shakespeare himself didn't know was in it. But I realize I approach great writing like I do people, where I sit and I listen with the expectation that they might not have articulated all of it, but what it is that has brought them into the world, the script or the person, has its own innate integrity. That it's okay, that it works. And if it looks like it doesn't work, I'm just not listening right.
Yes, because in their world it makes sense, or they might be frustrated with where it's taken them, but their story is their narrative and it's not over. Your story is not over until it's over, so where can you go next? New choices.
Exactly. And so you have to trust the thing or the person that you're working with. Yeah. You have to have a deep, abiding trust of it. And then your curiosity and humility allow you to discover all these little bits of magic. And my favorite part is when you see the magic and you hold it up and say, "What do you think?" And they go, "Oh, that's amazing."
And in Hamlet terms, that's the showing the mirror up to nature.
Yeah. Exactly. And so that keeps me in a really healthy relationship with knowing and learning and power and responsibility and all those things, because whatever I'm committing to is bigger and more important than me.
And so whatever you're committing to as a through line and a golden thread and everything you're describing about it, you've got to be passionate about it in order for it to pull you in.
Absolutely. I've got to be passionate about it. And it's funny because I'm looking at doing a PhD soon. I'm thinking about PhD work, and it's exactly that. I've got to be passionate about it. Part of it is because I know there will be hard days when I wish I didn't have to do it. And I know ahead of time on those days that it's that deep belief that the work is worth it that will keep me going. If I haven't got that, I'm out.
It's
then I feel trapped.
Keep your golden purpose in front of you.
Yeah.
Pull you towards your future.
Exactly.
So I think, and we're still listening to the Good Listening To podcast with Genevieve, Grant Thompson, or Grant Thompson, Genevieve. We can mix it about a bit. So now we're up to 3 things that inspire you, please.
Okay. 3 things that inspire me. It's funny. I thought a little bit about this before. Well, I'll go back to my father in that the example of my father's life and having watched him, because he was so transparent in his thinking and what he was trying to solve, try to protect himself because he knew how sensitive he was. And that he could articulate this to me as a young adult. He often looked quite tough and hard. And he said, I know it looks that way, but I'm doing a lot to protect myself because I know how sensitive I am. And certain things I don't think I can handle. So I don't hang out with those people.
So strength in vulnerability. So knowing that it's not weak to be vulnerable, which is a lovely thread that's obvious in what I suppose you and I both bring, I suppose. Yes.
Absolutely. And recently I've been talking to people who knew my father, who he helped when they were young, and they're telling me the stories of how he helped them, which is such a cool thing.
Yes.
And they said something that made me go, oh, that's why I do what I do in the world. They said he had a real eye for looking especially at young people. That's who he was working with. And being curious about them and recognizing when they showed a little bit of magic that they had. Skill or a gift or an energy that they had, and then saying, you can do that. Like he let a 13-year-old girl organize a school trip to a New York Broadway play. He was like, yep, here's the money, make it happen. She was like, I can do so empowering people, but only in the right places. He didn't always get it right. Sometimes he'd hold back where maybe he could have given or vice versa, but just that desire to sort of see people fill up what they could be.
And nudge them forward to give them courage.
Yeah, exactly. And like, let them be scared. And I'll give you one more example. When before he was officially dying, when I would visit him in the Caribbean on his boat, he took me snorkeling, and I'm not that confident. I like being in the water, but I'm not that confident in terms of underwater stuff. He had a really good way of, you have your goggles on and all you can see is someone's eyes really, and everything else is distorted, right? Goggles to goggles. He had a really good way of being under the water, and then, you can't talk. So you point at a fish and you, are you okay? Are you okay? He would look in my eyes and make sure that I wasn't scared. He had a really good way of holding himself as an anchor for you. And I watched him do that with other people. When he decided it was his job to push people or to help them grow, he took the position of, I'll be the thing that you can hang on to when you're scared. And he didn't always feel it, but he would take on that role for the sake of doing that task. And so the sense of like, people who, it's like my father was a great example, but anyone who says, this is my job and I'm damn well going to do it, even if I don't feel like it, that.
He knew his purpose. His purpose was to be the rock, by the sound of it.
Absolutely. And so when you've seen me teach public speaking type stuff, and people go, oh, but I'm nervous and I can't. I'm like, you can have a flu, you can be miserable, you can be bleeding and still do a good presentation. It's a job. It's a skill set, and you can commit to it and you can do it. It has nothing to do with your persona or your God-given gifts. It's a commitment that you can make. And so it opens the doors to things that people think aren't accessible to them.
Or that they knew not were possible until they get nudged into the sunlight to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I did with you, actually.
Yes.
Remember? Yeah.
I do. There was a genuine. This analogy really sat with me, where I felt like I was. There was a bit of a new type of work I was doing, so I was a fledgling in a nest, and I just felt the Genevieve Grant Thompson big. You don't have particularly big boots, but I felt this boot up my arse to just get me to go flappity 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 flap, and it got me into the way I coach now, actually. But it was a flappy flappy flap away from the nest. Because I could do it anyway. Because I'd been flying before, but I'd forgotten how to fly briefly because I'd had quite a weird time circa 2010, as we do. You know, there are moments of transience in our illustrious path.
Yeah, where we go, I don't know who I am, and I guess I had that moment where I completely trusted that you could do it.
Oh, and in fact, I need to credit you also with you gave me the genesis of the vocabulary of how I, to this day, still do coaching. It's grown and grown and grown, but the seeds of what you planted are now who I am as a coach, and it's down really importantly to you as the early genesis points of nudging along the path to this whole delta of possibility that could open.
Wow. Awesome.
Take that bit of silence as we let that float in the water.
That's amazing.
And we could be at the two things that squirrels never fail to get your attention now.
Yes. Okay, so I have to be honest. One thing that never fails to get my attention is squirrels.
It is literally squirrels. So the thing that makes you go squirrels is squirrels.
I'll be walking down the street in the city or through a park. You can ask Steve, and I'll go squirrel, squirrel, and Steve will actually bring nuts in his pocket if he can remember, so we can try to feed the squirrels. We're just little kids who always, no matter where I am, squirrel. Foxes even more so.
So squirrels and foxes.
Yeah,
both of which But the comedian in me can't resist saying both squirrels and foxes on your path of where you're at to make your husband get his nuts out.
Yes.
Squirrels! Exactly. I'll get my nuts out.
Get your nuts out, babe. Squirrel! Oh. Exactly.
It could be the opposite of a safe word.
Like that forever.
It could be the opposite. I'm just riffing on something there. It could be the opposite of a safe word when you go, squirrels! Yeah. I know what's about to happen. I'm going to get my nuts out. I'm kidding. Anyway. So anyway, there you are. Squirrels, we'll leave that to Philip.
Yeah, I am.
Oh, Stan's got a squirrel. Stan just arrived. Come here, Stan. Stan, this is Stan, by the way, just bringing him into the picture suddenly.
Hi, Stan.
This is Genevieve from in the...
He made me this collar so that I may talk. Squirrel!
There you are. That's the clip. Thank you, Stan. He's been in the background going, I was, squirrels.
Excellent.
Stan, very well. I'm actually recording it as well, so this is... But thank you for coming by. But hello,
Thank
Genevieve.
you, Stan.
Yeah, that was Stan beautifully. He's my lockdown bestie, turning up with the clip from the film Up, which is squirrels, isn't it? Yeah. So if you don't know what reference is, it's from the film Up, isn't it? Thank you, Stan. You're very welcome. See you later, alligator. Excellent. So yes, sorry. So squirrels and foxes. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that, or
yes,
I feel we mined that beautifully.
Well, it's just I'm constant. I love that the innocent, open sort of excitement of seeing critters do what they do. Yeah, it's just honest. It's true. But what else never fails to grab my attention? Light.
Ooh.
So, let me show you. Let me see if I can show you what I mean. Can you see on my ceiling?
I'm seeing some lovely board of bit of boat board on the ceiling of the boat, and you show me light refraction. Yes, you are. There's a sunlight refraction on the roof. I can see.
So I could stare at that for hours.
And I'm sure people could listen to that for hours. But remember, it's a visual clue you're giving us at the moment, and I'm having to describe it because we're on a podcast.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's great because light reflection then is what you love to be absorbed by.
Especially when light bounces off the water, or a sunset or a sunrise, or
yes,
light coming through the trees, it will always strike me. And
In
I
a way,
don't
it's like an
think I
immediate.
take it for granted.
It's an immediate clearing of itself
Yeah.
that just suddenly appears, isn't it? The idea of some refraction to admire.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's like a natural event, but weather, light, the way it bounces through things in cities, in natural habitats, especially if it's moving light, it always gets me. And I think it's back to that, probably that somatic, that bodily thing of just, I'm a creature in the world, and this is information about my natural habitat, and it always just gets me.
And do you remember? I'll make sure I get the picture again and drop it into the bottom of what we're talking about somehow. But there is that picture of your quote again about honey being your precious pot of golden honey and energy. But there's an extraordinary picture in a I think it's a Venezuelan sort of rich jungly environment. My geography could be barking there, but it's sun shining through an incredibly fat honeycomb full of honey, and the sunlight refracting off it. So if you've not seen the photograph, I'll make sure I send it to you, because that picture made me think of you and our connection, because of just honey.
Yeah, that's perfect. So that idea of like, just, you could just stare at the light shining through that for ages, right? And actually, I can send you. I've been doing a thing lately that I call the listening project. But what I do is, you know how you're walking through the world and you hear a sound.
Yeah.
That if you could isolate, you're like, that's just something I could listen to for a while. It's interesting,
Yes.
a little capture. And so what I do is I take my video camera on my little smartphone and aim it at something in the environment that doesn't necessarily have to do with the sound itself. It's just what's going on, and take just a 1-minute video. But what I'm really doing is focusing on the sound. So
Yes.
what's wonderful is you end up walking through the world and just pausing for a whole 60 seconds and just listening.
It's like being absorbed by one of nature's installations.
Yeah, exactly.
And if only
And
you're
so
present enough to notice them, they can pass you by often, can't they?
Exactly. So these little moments of like nature gave you a squirrel, right? You just and you just can sit and enjoy it for a minute. But I can send you one that I have that is what I ended up doing, was putting the camera down, and there was this really wonderful refraction on the water of the light above. That is a perfect example of how the light got it. And I think Steve actually saw it and said, you need to capture this one.
There is that
but the sound is
and this is Guess the Film that's on my mind. I can't remember the name of the film, when there was suddenly just a montage of a plastic bag blowing in the wind. Do you remember there was a very famous
that
film?
Was American
Beauty. Thank you. American Beauty.
American Beauty.
Thank you very much. American Beauty, which, you know, just to blow smoke at you, that's what I'm talking to here. An American Beauty, who's also from
exactly.
Anyway. So now we're at the point of tell me a quirky or unusual fact about you you've not yet divulged that we couldn't possibly know about you, Genevieve Grant Thompson, until you tell us.
That I have a stutter.
Oh.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly well disguised. And you're in good company, because way back when, one of my comic heroes, Michael Palin, used to have a stutter, apparently, and who's in a fish called Wanda, where he exaggerated that and has created a foundation off the back of it. Sorry, it's not about him, it's about you, so tell me more.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a lot like that, and it still shows up as a somatic. I still feel a little clutching up in my body sometimes around sounds, and I inherit it from my father. So usually a person with a stutter has one parent. Usually if there are parents and one has a stutter, one kid will get it and no other kids will get it.
Okay. Yes.
Right. Yeah. I have a stutter. It was much more visible when I was really young. It comes out when I'm tired or overexcited or stressed. It has taught me that thing I was talking about before, actually, about that idea that if you commit to something, my fluency is a result of my having repeatedly committed different aspects of my psyche, mostly, to understanding what it is that brings out my stutter and unraveling the tension around it. And so I'm not trying to cure the stutter. I'm trying to let it teach me what it can about who I am and who I need to be in the world.
And does it arrive or suddenly, does it re-emerge at times in your life when your body's telling you you're stressed when you didn't know you were? A bit like that sort of inner wisdom that tells us.
Yep. It's one of the great sort of things. So my stutter will show up if I'm really tired, to the point where, when you're like, oh, I'm tired, but I can do a little bit more. My stutter will tell me, no, you can't even talk. So go to bed.
It's your body's way of telling you to, for fuck's sake, you're tired. Get over yourself.
Exactly. It's either cut it out or get out.
Thank you for sharing that too. We now, in the structure of the podcast, we keep in the clearing, we move away from the tree. You've been implying this anyway, but now we're going to talk overtly about alchemy and gold. When you, Genevieve Grant Thompson, are at purpose and in flow, what is the alchemy and the gold that you are here to bring?
I feel like it is something to do with allowing the truth to come to the surface. If it's with people, and this is interesting because I coach people and I love working with people, and in some ways I love what human beings are, but I also kind of hate them because of what they're not and how they exhaust me. They regularly break your heart with what they're not doing that they could do. So I get maybe the goal that I'm bringing when I'm in the zone. Probably what happens is the people around me come into their own power. They flourish, they grow, they evolve, they cease acting from victimhood or doing everything they can to protect themselves from their discomfort. And they operate from a space of trusting their own life a bit more. That's it.
So it makes complete sense about the whole holistic approach, the somatic approach. It's not just one thing. It's about the whole person, the bigger fix. Even though we're in, without getting into political stuff, the world has become so binary in a way that's been incredibly challenging and toxic. Whether it's COVID, schmovid, Trump, schmum, in Biden, schmeiden, all that stuff. And so I'm really not trying to get too deep into that, but to keep a sort of constant pulse majestic, a beacon of somatic help in the communities in which you find yourself and the spaces you find yourself and the clearings you find yourself in is a wonderful purpose, I would say, just to reflect that back to you. Yeah,
absolutely. And it reminds me of a very simple lesson I was given probably from my mother, actually. Any space that you go into, you should leave it just a tiny bit better than how you found it. Yeah, otherwise, what are you doing there?
Don't fart and leave and not fess up to the fact you've just farted.
Bring some air freshener with you,
Yes. And by the way, you just mentioned your mother there, and if I may, just because you've majored so much on your father, I'm slightly concerned for you that she'll end up being an unsung hero. So just big up your mother for me for a moment. So tell me just a little short sort of vignette about the awesomeness of your mom.
The thing that
have you lost me? Can you hear me still?
No, it stuttered a bit, and I think Zoom heard me say stutter, and it's now showing that it can stutter too. But
so do you need the question again, or are you there?
You want me to big up my mom first?
Well, just because you've mentioned so much about your dad, and you've mentioned your mum in passing, anything you'd like to tell us about your mother?
Well, the thing is, my father, in my mythology of it, my father was the bombastic one that did outrageous things. But my mom was the one that created the structure that made it all possible. Right?
Oh, I love that.
So sorry, Papa comes home with the lion cub and says, we're going to bring this lion into the family. And Mom's like, okay, fine. And goes about the business of making sure that everyone is safe and fed. And she said she was the one who said yes. She was the one who said yes to everything. And then proceeded to make it possible.
I love that the sort of the word that you didn't say, which was occurred, is the idea of in the time that you know, obviously your mum and dad didn't end up together in the end, but the constancy is something that helped you in your development. Lovely. So now we move to
absolutely. She's why we felt there.
Beautiful. I'm just letting that hang there with that lovely silence of knowledge. And we're now, and am I still stuttering, by the way, or is it okay, the Zoom connection we've got? Can you hear me okay?
It seems good, yeah. I think there's a slight delay, but it seems good.
So now we're still in the clearing, and we're coming to award you with a cake, Genevieve Grant Thompson, and it's your opportunity to put a cherry on the cake, and this can be open to interpretation as the final metaphor within the clearing. It can be the best piece of advice you've ever been given, a favourite inspirational quote, and we can also get really existential on your airs, inspired by all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. How would you most like to be remembered? You know, you can open this up. So how would you like to leave us as your invitation to the legacy of this conversation?
There's two bits to it. One, I am not interested in being remembered. I am interested in people taking whatever I give them so into themselves that they think it was their own idea. So if they forget that it was me that taught them that, but they remember that they felt good when they were around me, might be nice. But more that they're actually living whatever we discovered when I was helping them. The best piece of advice that I was ever given, that I pass on, was one day, and again, this is from my father, but I've heard it from other people in various ways. One day I was on the phone with him talking about living in other spaces, England versus Baltimore versus New York, and trying to figure out who I am and trying to find spaces where I get to be who I want to be, and how spaces change you. You know, the environment that you're in certainly affects who you are. So we talked about that for a while, and then we talked about other things, and then it was time to get off the phone. And I was about to put the phone down. Okay, I love you, Papa. Bye-bye. And just as I was putting the phone down, he called my name, Genevieve, in the way that parents can when they sort of, you know, get your attention.
Yank your collar.
Yes, sir. Yeah, exactly. Genevieve. Yes, sir. Always be exactly who you are.
Beautiful. And as you were talking there, you reminded me of the quote that I may have even heard for the first time through your lips, because it ended up being almost like a final slide on lots of stuff that I started to tune into, was the idea of the Maya Angelou quote, which is people never remember what you say, but they always remember how you make them feel. And if I may, you're a really beautiful exponent of that too, I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for blessing us with your presence here in the clearing. If you want to find out more about Genevieve Grant Thompson on the old interweb, the beautiful nomad that you are, there is the internet, though, that can reference you. So where would we go to find out more about you, to connect with you if we want to?
I just have a tiny little website called GenevieveK.com, and it tells you a little bit about me and how to get in touch. That's the easiest way. GenevieveK.com, and what does the K stand for? Catherine, of course, isn't it? Catherine, yes.
GenevieveK.com, and excuse my cough there. And absolutely delicious and beautiful. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, as I said, here on the Good Listening To podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I think you're wonderful, Chris, and I love what you do in the world.
Oh, I wasn't fishing for anything. But thank you.
That's all right. That's what I want to say. It's genuinely what I want to say.
A GLT with me, CG, and good night. You've been listening to the Good Listening To podcast with me, Chris Grimes. If you've enjoyed the programme, then please do subscribe on all the usual channels. There's also a dedicated Facebook group for the programme too, and I'm hosted on Buzzsprout. If you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, then please do, and then on Twitter and Instagram at @ChrisGrimes. Also, if you'd be interested in having some coaching from me to help you level up your confidence, your personal impact or your brand, then contact me via email, chris@secondcurve.uk. So until next time, thank you for listening and goodbye.